Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends of the Hague Institute for Global Justice, welcome to a truly special event this morning. Today we have the opportunity to hear from one of the leading statespersons of our time, a friend of The Hague and of the Hague Institute, Secretary Madeleine K. Albright. That Secretary Albright has agreed to inaugurate this lecture series in The Hague is, I think, a testament to the role the city is increasingly playing as the international capital of peace and justice. And it is also something for which I am personally grateful. As president of the Hague Institute, I have had the unique opportunity to rely on Secretary Albright's counsel as chair of our advisory council since my arrival here 2.5 years ago. For me, this is the latest chapter in a friendship of 27 years, dating back to the days when Madeleine and I taught together at Georgetown University. And of course, I recall with gratitude that as a newly minted PhD, she chaired the search committee which selected me to join the faculty of the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service in 1988. The commitment to global justice that I have witnessed on the part of Secretary Albright since those days has, of course, remained undimmed in the intervening decades. It is a commitment that led her to join the founding father of the Institute, Mayor Jozias van Aartsen, whom I'm also delighted to welcome this morning in conceptualizing and launching this unique institute. It is fitting, then, that a lecture series on contemporary issues in global justice should be launched in Secretary Albright's name. And you do us a great honor, Madam Secretary, in being here to inaugurate this series yourself. Today's lecture follows the launch yesterday at the Peace Palace of the report of the Commission on Global Security, Justice and Governance, which Secretary Albright co-chaired with Professor Ibrahim Gambari, also my former colleague from the United Nations. The report contains far-reaching, yet politically grounded recommendations to improve global governance. Its quality rests in no small part on Secretary Albright's experience, not just of diplomacy and leadership, but also as a scholar. That the commission which Secretary Albright chaired focused on the critical intersection of security and justice is a recognition of the centrality of this dynamic to contemporary global affairs. It is a dynamic that the Hague Institute has placed at the core of its work, and it is to advance a better understanding of these issues that we conceived these lecture series in global justice. It is our hope that the Madeleine K. Albright Lecture in Global Justice will become a preeminent forum for the discussion of world affairs. It is also our aspiration that the lecture will help to shape policy thinking on those issues, reminding those with the capacity to act that although security should remain a core aim in the decades to come, without justice, any illusion of security will remain only that. Rarely has such a prominent platform been given to the essential issue of global justice. First and foremost, that this lecture series will bear the name of Secretary Albright will ensure that the ideas shared from this stage will resonate across the globe. Moreover, as a young and vibrant think and do tank, we are privileged to launch this lecture series in partnership with one of the world's oldest and most respected think tanks, the Brookings Institution, represented here today by Senior Fellow Ted Piccone, who will moderate a discussion with Secretary Albright after her lecture. This is a true transatlantic partnership. Today's event is, if you like, the mirror image of another lecture series the Hague Institute has launched also in partnership with Brookings, on international legal issues, the Stephen Breyer Lecture, which the Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court launched in Washington last year. And of course, it is our great honor to collaborate in this lecture series with the City of The Hague under the leadership of Mayor Jozias van Aartsen. The mayor is an indefatigable champion of this institute, and it is thanks to his efforts that The Hague has flourished as the city in which global justice is elaborated, practiced, and advanced. In addition to these ongoing contributions, we owe a particular debt to the mayor and to the City of The Hague for making today's lecture possible with a generous financial contribution. It is with a special gratitude, therefore, that I invite you, Mr. Mayor, to take the stage and to introduce Secretary Albright.
For a minute. Madam Secretary, Ambassador Gambari, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Secretary Albright doesn't need an introduction. She is an icon and an inspiration to many in the whole world. Many thanks, Madam Secretary, for your presence here in the City of The Hague, for your insights and your leadership vis-à-vis the Hague Institute of Global Justice. You are the chair of the advisory board of this institute. The report published yesterday together with your co-chair, Ambassador Gambari, is in my view, a gift to a troubled world that doesn't need any explanation. And we only have one United Nations, and we have to be very, very careful with that institution. And it's now up to politicians, many politicians, hopefully in this world, to rekindle the debate about the United Nations. There are many forceful recommendations in this excellent report, but a thread through the whole report is to bring back into the mechanism of the United Nations as Hugo de Groot called it, the Societas Humana. He wrote his book Mare Liberum, in which he stated that a few centuries ago here in the City of The Hague. And that means bringing the outside world into the mechanism and the way the United Nations operates. And that means business. It means the NGO world. It means the G20. It means bringing together United Nations and larger cities and metropolitan areas. To bring in more women into the UN mechanism, which is a very important part of the report. And of course, tackling the veto of the Security Council in an, let's say, innovative way. The debate has to be started, and it must be done in a spirit of doing, like the Hague Institute president as a do and think tank, but especially a do tank, because that's quite important at present, approaching United Nations 70th anniversary and the 75th in 5 years' time. During the press conference, Madam Secretary, yesterday, you touched on another pressing issue. In a more or less Kennedy-esque way, you said, Europe, get your act together. Because the more divided Europe is, and the more aggressive the president of the Russian Federation behaves and operates, the more necessary is a Europe, a political European Union, a political European Union with a real clout, backed by a forceful defense. Because we can't say what was the old, I think, musical song in London at the end of the 19th century. We don't want to fight, but by jingo, if we do, we've got the ships, we've got the men, we've got the money too. But that's not the case if you look at Europe today. Madam Secretary, thank you for your presence here. Thank you for your great anecdotes yesterday. We had everybody who have heard her at a very, very special day. Thank you for the inspiration to the female diplomats at the Foreign Ministry. I heard the enthusiastic report of that meeting yesterday afternoon. Thank you for your wisdom, represented by the owl, your wearing as a pin today, and come back soon. Thank you very much.
Oh, I forgot 3 times. Great. Well, thank you very, very much, and welcome to everybody. What a great audience. I'd like to welcome the ladies and gentlemen and the members of the Diplomatic Corps, and very especially the American Ambassador, Mr. Bross. Thank you very much all for being here, and my co-chair, Ambassador Gambari. And I'm really delighted to be here, and Abby, thank you for everything and our long friendship and what you are doing here. It is almost exactly 4 years ago that I participated in the launch of the Hague Institute for Global Justice with my very, very dear friend, Jozias van Aartsen. So I am thrilled to see how quickly the Institute has established itself as a leader in the field, and this success has an awful lot to do with the vision of the mayor and the very determined leadership of a very close friend, as I said, Abby Williams. So congratulations to both of you and to the great staff here, and I wish everybody continued success. Let me also say how deeply honored I am that the Hague Institute and Brookings have come together to establish the Madeleine K. Albright Global Justice Lecture, and I want to be absolutely clear that I did not pick the name. Like the Institute itself, my hope is that this lecture series will help disseminate the high-quality research which policymakers require while illuminating the everyday struggles which people confront across the globe. And I also hope that it'll reflect a practical approach to these issues. And in that spirit, my remarks today will discuss justice not as an abstract concept, but rather something that makes a tangible and positive difference in people's lives. In part, I take this perspective out of necessity because I'm not a legal theorist. I am, however, sometimes referred to as the mother of all lawyers. The reason is that 2 of my daughters are attorneys, as well as 2 son-in-laws, and this means that whenever our family gets together, everybody talks at the same time. I do sometimes feel as though I should have been compensated for my time in government with a law degree, however, because virtually every major foreign policy initiative had a legal side to it. And that was true whether we were conducting peace negotiations, exploring new ideas on arms control, or bargaining with Canada about whose fishermen should be allowed to catch the most salmon. The end of the Cold War contributed to the increased focus on law in foreign policy because traditional structures were falling apart and new rules had to be established. Consider, for example, the case of the former Yugoslavia. In 1993, I took office as America's permanent representative to the United Nations. At the time, the war was raging in Bosnia, where a UN peace mission was failing and atrocities were being committed every day. I was among those who said that we should create an international tribunal here at The Hague to hold the perpetrators accountable. And many ridiculed the idea, and most predicted that it would fail. After all, Bosnia was not Nuremberg, where the suspects were in custody before the court was formed. In Bosnia, the chief suspects were still in positions of authority. In fact, they were winning the war. With the fighting still going on, the tribunal's investigators had a hard time interviewing witnesses and gathering evidence, but I still believed in the tribunal, and I could not accept that in the last decade of the 20th century, we would sit by and watch ethnic cleansing and mass rape perpetrated with impunity in the heart of Europe. Early in 1994, I visited a mass grave near the Croatian city of Vukovar. Serbs controlled the area at the time and didn't allow excavation. What I saw was a field of rusted refrigerators and scraps of farm equipment, but we suspected, rightly, it turned out, that beneath the soil were the bodies of 200 hospital patients who had disappeared some months previously. I met later with local Serbs, and they didn't deny the existence of a mass grave. What puzzled them was, why would anybody care? After all, they said, there were many such graves, and there had been many previous wars. Obviously, we are all human and will never achieve perfect justice. But I believe that every time an extremist leader is tried in court and punished for ordering a massacre, or a military officer for burning a village, or a paramilitary thug for abusing a woman, the rule of law is strengthened and the chance that such behavior will be repeated is diminished. So I'm proud that the United Nations members stood up for the tribunal during its difficult early years. The tribunal, like any such institution, is imperfect, but it has won more than 75 convictions, established a vital precedent for the prosecuting humanitarian crimes, and laid the foundation for the International Criminal Court, as we said yesterday, Mr. Justice. Not only that the tribunal's indictment of Slobodan Milosevic helped end that dictator's hold on power. During my years in office, the Balkans were a major focus, but they were not the only arena where justice itself was on trial. My worst day as Secretary of State was August 7th, 1998, when terrorist explosions struck our embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Hundreds of people were killed, including 12 Americans. Within a matter of days, we had captured several suspects who made it clear that Osama bin Laden was behind the attack. The question for us was whether to consider this a law enforcement matter demanding a judicial response, or a military matter in which the use of armed force was justified. We decided it was both. We proceeded to prosecute the conspirators we had captured, but we also launched dozens of cruise missiles at bin Laden's training camp, killing a number of his top lieutenants and failing to hit him, we think, by only a matter of hours. We sought international help in identifying and freezing terrorist funds, and we used a combination of law enforcement and intelligence to detect and prevent many other terror attacks, including a plan to bomb Los Angeles. Since the 9/11 attacks, we have heard a lot more about the global war on violent extremism, which some describe in religious terms. But this struggle is not about beliefs, it's about behavior. The law doesn't care what people think, the law cares about what people do. And when terrorists fly airplanes into buildings or blow up subway trains, they're trying to destroy the very foundations of a society based on the rule of law. We cannot let them succeed. Our task collectively is to ensure that they are held accountable to the law. In some cases, as in Afghanistan, that has required military action. More often, it will require the use of judicial and law enforcement means to identify and apprehend terrorist suspects. But that task is made harder by the chaos and turmoil now ripping apart much of the Middle East and North Africa. When I was Secretary of State, I sometimes indulged in a habit that I had developed as a professor, trying to explain foreign policy in visual terms. Whenever I wanted to discuss Europe, I brought along a chart that I had asked our section of intelligence and research at the State Department to put together that showed all the different political and economic institutions that had been established on the continent. With all the overlapping circles and lines, the chart looked like some astronomical map, or that it looked like it was a kitten set loose in a string factory. I think I probably showed it to you. I called it the Euro mess because it was so confusing, and even joked that to understand it, you had to be a genius or French. I also talked about the world in terms of the Rings of Saturn, which I must admit drew some strange looks. My idea was that the international system could be compared to the solar system, with all the nations circling around like planets in their orbits, held in place by a shared commitment to law. At the same time, there were rogue states and terrorist groups doing everything they could to disrupt the regular order. And like the Rings of Saturn, they were simultaneously part of the system and outside of it. What is dangerous is that advances in technologies have made it more and more possible for those who want to wreck the system to cause enormous damage. The rings are expanding in scope and gaining ever sharper edges. And this is the great challenge that we face today in the Middle East and North Africa, where extremist organizations are sprouting up in areas where governing institutions and the rule of law are weak or non-existent. In some cases, they are offering basic services in pseudo-courts, providing a semblance of order, even if it is a tyrannical one. In this evolving terrorist landscape, no group has gained more infamy than ISIS, which calls itself the Islamic State, but is neither Islamic nor a state. Many in the region now call them Daesh, and since they hate that name, that's what I've decided to call them as well. I have also decided that the rise of Daesh and other groups is both a symptom and a cause of the broader crisis in the region. And because extremism is a multifaceted problem, it will require a comprehensive solution. Over the long term, the international community has to help the people of Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Yemen build institutions that support both peace and justice. Although each of these countries faces unique problems, one thing they do share in common is that they are deeply divided along ethnic, religious, and tribal lines. And if they are to become stable, trust must grow among the various factions. But trust is based on law. It is based on knowing that if you play by the rules, others will be required to do it as well. And it's based on confidence that violence will be punished, courts will be fair, elections will be free, and the rights of minorities respected. I've seen many yardsticks used to measure progress in the region, but for me, the key question relates to law. Do people accept authority and legitimacy of the government? Do they have faith in the legal system? Do they feel safer or less safe when they see a policeman? Until these questions can be answered satisfactorily, the situation will remain unsettled and a source of concern to us all. Of course, these aren't the only legal questions whose answers will determine the future stability of the Middle East and other regions of the world. There is, for example, the question of who has the right to build nuclear weapons. Under existing law, 5 countries are allowed to have nuclear weapons, while all nations are encouraged to use nuclear power for peaceful purposes. This system was set up more than 4 decades ago, and for a long time it worked. Many countries that could have built nuclear warheads decided not to do so. More recently, however, 2 problems have arisen. First, India and Pakistan have chosen to remain outside the treaty regime and have openly built nuclear arms. Second, North Korea and Iran have misled United Nations agencies about the scope and extent of their nuclear activities. In the case of Iran, an extraordinary diplomatic effort is underway to reduce tensions and to develop arrangements that both Tehran and the world community can accept. In the case of North Korea, the issues are even more complicated because the government there is not just thinking about building nuclear weapons, it has already done so. This October will mark 15 years since I went to North Korea to negotiate with that country's enigmatic leader, Kim Jong-il. I am still the highest level sitting American official to have done such a meeting. Our talks were conducted in Pyongyang, perhaps the strangest city on earth. When I met Kim Jong-il, I found a man of considerable confidence and truly amazing puffed up hair. To appear taller, I wore heels, but then I looked over at him and he did too. His primary goal was to normalize relations with the United States, and I told him that that would not be possible unless he agreed to limit his weapons programs. He said he was sure that an agreement could be reached, and we made considerable headway before the Clinton administration left office and we ran out of time. As you might suspect, the Bush administration thought that a different strategy might achieve better results. It tried to isolate Pyongyang, which didn't work because Kim Jong-il was far more worried about appearing weak than about being isolated. Today, with Kim Jong-il's enigmatic son in charge, the situation appears no closer to being resolved, and looking to the future, we know that much depends on whether nuclear policy is subject to the rule of law or to no rules at all. The same is true for many of our other major security challenges. For example, in Afghanistan, the United States and NATO have been working for nearly 14 years to strengthen the central government and to defeat extremist violence. A big problem has been the failure of government in Kabul to establish an effective legal system. As a result, much of the economy depends on illegal drugs, the police have a reputation for corruption, and many Afghans cooperate with terrorists because they don't see any other choice. In the coming years, Afghanistan's success will depend in large part on whether the government can be counted on to observe and to enforce the law. I'm hopeful that progress can be made on this front because Afghanistan's new president, Ashraf Ghani, understands from his own training as a World Bank economist that legal rights are essential to peaceful development. A country such as Afghanistan is fortunate to have a leader who believes in the rule of law. Unfortunately, there are many important countries that lack such leaders, including Russia. By invading and annexing parts of Ukraine, President Putin has ignored international law. And through his attacks on his enemies, including civil society and the free press, Putin has turned Russia's domestic laws into a tool of repression. President Putin's actions and the actions of many leaders of his ilk remind us that while law can provide the moral basis for a just and humane society, the imposition of unjust statutes creates a platform for tyranny. In a free society, a citizen's duty is to obey the law. In a repressive one, duty may point in a different direction. The list of men and women who spent time in jail for violating the wrong kind of laws includes some of our greatest heroes, Mahatma Gandhi, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King Jr., Václav Havel, Nelson Mandela, and Aung San Suu Kyi. And that's why our statutes must be shaped and enforced with the interests of true justice in mind. We must strive for rule of law, not rule by law. Of course, these principles are easier to articulate than to implement. Lawyers are trained to argue every side of any case, and the powerful are in the best position to see that their side is fully represented. But justice demands both fairness and consistency in separating right from wrong. After half a millennium of international law, we have made important progress toward that goal, but we're still a long way off and at times face very serious setbacks. The world is, to put it mildly, a mess. That's a diplomatic term of art. We are grappling with an unprecedented set of problems, and if there's one thing that all of the challenges I've mentioned today have in common, it is that they do not fit into neat categories of justice issues or security issues. Rather, they stand at the noisy intersection of justice and security. And I believe more and more of the world's focus in the years ahead will be on grappling with the complicated linkage between the two. Making global governance deliver on security and justice is a monumental task, one that has been the focus of a commission that, supported by the Hague Institute along with their partner, the Stimson Center, that I have co-chaired with my good friend, Ambassador Gambari. And yesterday, as the mayor mentioned, the Commission presented its report called Confronting the Crisis of Global Governance. In it, we presented a number of recommendations which will be key to advancing an international system that simultaneously delivers security and justice. Our goal is to strengthen the mutually reinforcing links between these two fundamental ideas. And we took a special look at 3 areas which pose particular challenges in this regard, including the rise in violence linked to state fragility and weak governance, the growing threat posed by climate change, and the challenges and opportunities presented by a hyper-connected economy. While we made a number of specific recommendations, if I were to step back and elucidate a broader theme of our project, it is that those responsible for international justice have to work together more closely and cooperate more effectively with those responsible for international security. What happens too often today is that institutions with a focus on security do not pay enough attention to the imperative of justice, which is central to how conflicts can be brought to an end. Indeed, justice broadens our understanding of true, lasting security by infusing it with principles of fairness, equality, and inclusive governance. Meanwhile, those institutions focused on justice, I have to say, can be overly legalistic, failing to move beyond the world of international law to implement concrete efforts to forestall or end wars. Incorporating security into our thinking on justice can help lead to a more practical focus on safeguarding individuals and their institutions and lend these efforts a greater sense of urgency. Going forward, we have to break down the divisions between these two and embrace a vision of justice and security that is practical, interconnected, and achievable. And there's no better place to begin such an effort than here in The Hague, and there's no better time to begin than right now. Now, I have been out of office longer than I was in it, more than 14 years. In that time, I feel as if I've done a little bit of everything. I have started a business. I've returned to teaching. I serve as chair of America's National Democratic Institute. I've written 5 books, and I've been involved in task forces on everything from the need for interreligious dialogue to the prevention of genocide. And in the process, I have traveled to almost every corner of the globe. I did have a plane that used to say the United States of America, and now it says United Airlines. Or KLM. But wherever I go and whatever I do, the one theme that follows me is the necessity of security and the importance of justice under the law. Law establishes the framework for political organization, commercial activity, and social relations. It defines the balance between collective and individual rights. It establishes a connection between each of us and all of us. It is, in short, the cornerstone of civilization. If that cornerstone is to bear weight, it has to have integrity that comes from legitimacy, consistency, accessibility, and fairness. And such integrity can only flourish in conditions of peace and security. Building such a cornerstone requires a united effort and takes time. 4,000 years ago, a Babylonian leader by the name of Hammurabi issued a law code designed, and I quote, to cause justice to prevail in the country, to destroy the wicked and the evil, and to ensure that the strong do not oppress the weak, unquote. Hammurabi's quest remains a work in progress. Through technology, we have transformed the world, and yet we cannot claim that justice always prevails or that the strong no longer oppress the weak, which means that we still have an awful lot to do. We may differ in nationality, ethnicity, profession, and gender, but we have a common purpose, a shared mission to complete. And so in closing, let me say once again how deeply honored I am to be associated with the Hague, this institute, and its efforts to advance the cause of true justice. Thank you all very, very much.
Madam Secretary, thank you so much for your comments. It's an honor for me to be representing Brookings Institution and send greetings from our President Strobe Talbot, who served with you as Deputy Secretary of State for many years during the Clinton administration. I also want to send many warm thanks to Mayor Van Aartsen and to Avi Williams for this partnership and for giving us the opportunity to work with you on it, and we see great things ahead. I think what we've heard is such an inspiring, important message on the rule of law and security and justice and how complicated and difficult those issues are. And I think your focus not only on the big picture, but on some of the very practical challenges and trade-offs that we face are particularly important. I think we face that right now, and particularly this week, in what has happened and transpired with the case of President al-Bashir of Sudan and his visit to South Africa, the efforts by civil society in South Africa and victims, we have to remember there are victims of these cases, to prosecute, to indict, and to pursue justice for those victims. However, it runs right up against the most challenging issue, which is a sitting head of state who, for most of us, would be somehow immune from this kind of justice. So it raises a number of very difficult issues. It raises issues of the politics of justice, the role of other countries, including South Africa, in pursuing these matters, and also the question of when is justice delivered? Is justice delayed, justice denied? Or is there a case to be made for staging the pursuit of justice in a way that gets you some set of peaceful settlement, but at the same time, some accountability? And I just want you to comment on whatever aspect of those you feel comfortable commenting on in light of your own personal experience, your family experience in World War II in the Czech Republic, and in light of current politics.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and I am delighted to answer some questions, and since I'm no longer in the government, I'll actually be able to answer them. But the thing that I think you have pointed out is that international justice, or justice generally, is an evolving concept and very hard to get everything all at once. And the question is whether you decide to do what you can until the steps that you take that may not, in fact, deliver perfect justice immediately, but puts it within that train. I think one of the hardest parts that I found in terms of just dealing in negotiations or anything is the fact that there are certain concepts within the international system that actually contradict each other. And one of the issues on the Bashir question, or on the whole concept of responsibility to protect, which I can get back to, is the issue of sovereignty. We are based in a nation-state system where sovereignty is a very important part of it, which means that the sovereign, whoever is in charge, has the capability and the responsibility of taking care of his or her people. And that is a major, if you read through various documents, sovereignty is the big thing. And yet international justice is something that has to be common and has to be affected by a number of different states. So you immediately have that problem. And that is what I think has happened in the case of Bashir, who actually, one of the responsibilities of a sovereign is to protect his or her people, not kill them. So one of the main issues that comes up right away is, what if a sovereign is not doing what the responsibility is? So then this is where that concept of responsibility to protect comes from, and Bashir was responsible for an awful lot of what happened in Darfur. And so I think you've already got a conflict there. I do think that it's important to have laid down the fact that crimes against humanity, genocide, etc., are illegal, and then the question is how it is carried out. And the International Criminal Court at the moment does not have the power that the War Crimes Tribunal have to pick up people. And so I think people are doing the best they can. And I do think it is evolving, and just because it isn't perfect yet doesn't mean that we give up on it. But I do think that policymakers and academics need to understand the contradictions that exist within the international system. And part of it, in terms of the sovereignty and knowing what is going on in a country has to do with how much information we have. So one could argue, I would not be one of those, but I could, that people didn't know what was happening during World War II. That in fact millions of people were being killed, but they theoretically didn't know. The issue is we now do know everything that is going on. And the question is, what does that do in terms of that responsibility if the sovereign is not doing what he or she is supposed to do? Does the international community have some responsibility?
Well, I think we're going to hear a lot more about these cases, and there's another very important case, which is the case of Syria. You mentioned responsibility to protect as a cutting-edge concept that is having great trouble in implementation. Maybe we can come back to that in the question and answer, but I do want to give the large group here a chance to pose a few questions. We have a hard stop at 10 o'clock, so keep that in mind, and please keep your question as a question, very brief, introduce yourself, and why don't we try to take 3 at a time before we come back to Secretary Albright. Gentleman here first.
Good morning, Madam Secretary. I'm the Palestinian ambassador to The Hague. 15 years ago, you and President Clinton worked very hard at Camp David. Even you stayed up late, early mornings to achieve peace. Unfortunately, it did not work. Second Intifada, more killing on both sides, disaster. President Bush did not achieve much. President Obama, now in power. Would you have an advice for him as his last year in office, what he should do to bring peace in the Middle East? Thank you.
Let's take a couple more. I see a hand back here and then here.
Thank you. My name is Jan Petit, and I'm a consultant in philanthropy, and I'm a co-alumnus of United World College like Abby Williams. And my question is related to education, Secretary. First of all, thank you for working. Thanks. Thank you for being so kind, and we feel very honored that you are here in the Netherlands, and the fact that you are direct and humoristic teaches us something. I think we should add some humor to our directness. But I think you feel at home. My question is related to education. What role could education play in your very right question and plead for justice and law? I think education is a very powerful tool. We know a lot of institutions are trying to build bridges between cultures through education. What is your advice? Could you elaborate on that? Thank you.
Okay.
And there's one other question from this gentleman here.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary, for your wonderful lecture. I am Alexander Gorin, Ambassador of Ukraine to The Hague. And I would like to ask a question about nuclear issues. As you know, in Budapest 1994, it was signed the Budapest Memorandum. You have mentioned 2 threats. It is India, Pakistan, and North Korea and Iran. What about the nuclear power states that violated the nuclear security guarantees and assurances once given to the country with the 3rd largest nuclear potential, and then voluntarily simply decided not to proceed this way? So probably this is also the threat that the world, in order to get the global justice, should discuss and tackle. Thank you.
Okay. Well, those are all very easy questions. So let me begin, because in many ways they are actually linked. I think if I were to say to you, any of you, would you like to go to Camp David? I think you'd say yes. I can tell you after 2 weeks in the rain with the Israelis and Palestinians, I don't care if I ever go back. But the bottom line is that I do think we came very close, but Americans can put down all kinds of bridging ideas and all kinds of things, but unless there is the political will of the leaders in the place, nothing is going to happen. And I think that, unfortunately, it looks as though that is where we are now. The Israelis have made, there's a coalition government, and Prime Minister Netanyahu made many statements about that. And the Palestinians, if I may say so, are somewhat divided in where they are on things. And so I think the United States would obviously, with partners, the Quartet and various others, like to do something about it. But unless there is political will of the leaders, nothing is going to happen. So that would be my sense. I can link that to education, because part of what has gone on here is that there are various narratives of what has happened, and I believe that the children in those countries especially need to have the truth and not have their textbooks written in a way that automatically begins to create a sense of we don't like the other people. And that is not only true in the region of the Middle East, but is true throughout. And so education in itself is very important. And I think that the schooling systems have to be fair. I do think exchanges of students are essential. I know as a professor, I love seeing foreign students in my classes. I love it when, in fact, my students learn a lot of languages. When the issues started in Egypt with Mubarak, one of my students in class said, well, that wasn't translated right. And I said, well, how do you know that? And she said, because I speak Arabic. And out of 60 students, I said, how many of you are studying Arabic? 2/3 of them. And the others are studying Chinese. So I do think that that is very important. History also plays very much into your question on Ukraine. The president of Russia is making up his own history. It is very dangerous when you have the leader of a major country who has made up his own history and is living in a parallel universe. And as I stated in my remarks, he has done something unbelievably illegal. We were a part of having Ukraine and Kazakhstan give up its nuclear weapons with the idea that there would be a lesser number of nuclear weapons in the world, and the New START Treaty has begun a lessening of the numbers. I am very troubled by listening to the news today, which is that Putin has ordered more missiles. And let me just say this, and I will, if I may, just go on to this, is one of the legal aspects that brings the United States and Europe together is the NATO treaty, the Washington Treaty. Article 5 of the treaty is the heart of it, which is an attack on one is an attack on all. I am deeply troubled by what I have read recently in the papers, that the publics of Europe and the United States do not believe in the sanctity of Article 5. We are in deep trouble if that is true. And it goes to education. And it goes to what you asked me initially, Ted. People have forgotten history. And so there needs to be a true accounting of history. Article 5 is central. Media has to be helpful. Professors need to explain. Those of us that are older need to explain to the younger people what the threats are and that we need to be educated. So trying to pull these three questions together.
Great. We have time for maybe a few more questions. Gentleman in the way back, and then this woman in front here.
Hello, Madam Secretary. My name is Rick Otten. We already met yesterday for a few seconds. My question is about youth and students. How should they be involved in the Hague Institute for Global Justice or foreign policy in general? What are your thoughts about that?
Okay. Great. And this woman right here.
Hello, I'm Camilla. I study international relations and diplomacy at Leiden University. My question revolves around something you said about when justice is delivered, because you mentioned in your lecture that whenever a perpetrator is prosecuted, that brings more justice. But then how does these truth and reconciliation trials that happen, especially in Africa, relate to your notion or conceptualization of global justice?
Great. And one more here, this woman here in the front row.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'm the Ambassador of Senegal, and of course I know you because you were the most famous permanent representative in New York. And I'm very happy to have you here, and everybody, all Africa is happy to have you here. My question is, you were the first female US Secretary of State, and the first one in the history of the United States. And it was wonderful for the advancement of women worldwide, in the US, but worldwide. After so many years, how do you see the evolution of the advancement of women in the United States, but in worldwide, particularly when we think about Africa, the Middle East, the Balkan, where we are facing a situation of violence, sexual violence against women without any punishment. Thank you so much. And we are happy to see you again.
Thank you.
Let me say, first of all, I do believe that getting the youth involved is absolutely essential, and it relates a little bit to what I said previously about kind of amnesia in terms of what had happened, and education and understanding the history. Then also the vigor of young people and understanding that in fact the only way to operate is to be not just those that are on the outside, but on the inside. I urge my students very much to think about public service, and to try to, and public service is a very wide arena where many things can be done. One of the things that's happening in the United States is a movement towards national service of some kind, but definitely I think young people need to be involved and question and be a part of the product of a legitimate functioning governments. One of the things that I'm really troubled by is people are not really able to communicate with their governments. And I've said this before, I will repeat it, and it's I plagiarized it, so I admit that right away. A statement that I heard at a conference that I think works very well, which is people, especially your generation, is talking to governments on 21st century technology. The government hears them on 20th century technology and is giving 19th century responses. And therefore there is no confidence in institutions, and so something has to be done about that. On the question of justice generally, I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions have been unbelievably important. Especially in South Africa, they were absolutely instrumental, and they are able in fact to deal with kind of a spectrum of issues. And then Archbishop Tutu obviously played a very large role in that. I think it's important. I was just in Colombia where they are working on a peace process between the FARC and the government, and there has been questions about having or looking at a model of doing more in terms of truth and reconciliation commissions, because they provide another avenue for getting the story out. And I think there is a theme here, which I think starts with the answer that I gave on education here and history. There has to be some way of figuring out what happened. One of the reasons that I have felt that the War Crimes Tribunal has been important, and the ICC could be, is that it's important to assign individual guilt so that there isn't collective guilt. Not everybody in a society is responsible for what happened, and so the combination of trying to figure out what all the various parts really are, I think is very important. On the issue of women, let me say it is the 20th anniversary of the Beijing Women's Conference. There were action plans that were put out. Secretary Clinton, and in her current life, is really working and looking at what has really happened out of the 20th in the last 20 years, whether things are really happening. I think there has been progress for women, but it is, I think part of the problem is thinking that everything is done. It definitely is not. And I think that the countries that you mentioned are particularly difficult in terms of some of the things that Daesh has been doing about women. I do not think that one automatically thinks that Muslim societies do not want to have women as leaders. That is not true. It wasn't true in Pakistan. And the truth is the president of Kosovo is a woman. And so there are a number of different possibilities here, but we cannot think that it is done. And one of the recommendations out of the Commission is that the international system has to be more aware of crimes committed against women, how the peacekeepers operate, generally not enough women within the UN system as special envoys, and making sure that, and I have answered this many times, as Secretary of State, I made women's issues central to American foreign policy, not just because I'm a feminist, but because we know that societies work better when women are economically and politically empowered, and besides, it's a waste of half the population if women are not properly part of the system.
Well, I think you would all agree that we set a very high bar with the inaugural Madeleine Albright Lecture here. You would also agree that and understand why Madeleine Albright is one of the most respected figures in American foreign policy and has had such reach around the globe. The materials, what you heard today, will be available on the Brookings and the Hague Institute website. In the spirit of education, please disseminate it, 21st century technology, 20th, mimeographs, whatever it takes. And please join me in thanking Secretary Albright.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, see if I can get down these stairs. Great. Very good. Okay, all right, let me just say goodbye. Jozias, I'll see you. Okay.